Good morning, everyone. Inshallah, today I'm going to talk about the physiology of pulmonary ventilation as well as the lung mechanics. It's a subcategory of the pulmonary ventilation. So, in the beginning, what's pulmonary ventilation? We need to know the definition so we can understand the concept more. So, pulmonary ventilation is the amount of air that's coming to the alveoli for the sole purpose of gas exchange. So this is the definition of pulmonary ventilation. Now I'm going to explain some key points so we can understand it more. So here we have the right lung, as you can see. Here we have the right lung. Here we can see the upper lobe, the middle lobe, and the lower lobe. It's not realistic, of course, just for the purpose of learning. Here we can see the pleura in green, and there's attachment between the cirrus of the pleura and the lung. So, in the beginning, I have a question. Where do you think the ventilation will be more? In the upper, middle, or lower? So this is a very good question. Why? Because I am standing right now. So where is the ventilation will be more? In the upper or middle or lower part of the lung? So sometimes it will come to us that the amount of ventilation will be in the upper. Some people can say because of the gravity, the air will be in the lower. So I will explain it why now it's the difference. The pleural pressure first is not the same around the lung. In the upper part, it's -10. In the middle part, it's -5. In the lower part, it's -2.5 almost. So why is that? Imagine that now I have an elastic fiber. It's very heavy elastic fiber. And I'm stretching this elastic fiber. So this is the elastic fiber, and I'm stretching this elastic fiber. And there is gravity. This elastic fiber is very heavy. So there is gravity. What will happen if there is many holes in this elastic fiber? So if, for example, here we can see an elastic fiber. Here, the first two will be the upper part of the lung. The second two will be the middle, and the lower two will be the lower part of the lung. Here's the elastic fiber, and we have 6 holes in it. So if I stretch it, and it's very heavy, there is a gravity force that's pulling down the lung. So what will happen to those holes? The holes in the upper part will become bigger because I'm stretching, and the gravity is taking the lung down. So what will happen to the first 2 holes? They will become very big. The lower holes, what will happen to them? Because the gravity, they will become very small. So while standing, it will be like that. So the first 2 will be so big. The middle 2 will be less smaller, and the lower will be the smallest holes in the lungs, or we can call it smallest alveoli. So the alveoli, while I'm standing, the alveoli will be in the lower parts, the smallest, in the middle, and the biggest one will be in the upper part of the lung. Now, if you focus on this, which of those will be able to have the most air flow inside it? So if we look at the upper 2 holes, upper 2 alveoli, they are already big. They cannot stretch back. The compliance in them is very, very low. So they already cannot stretch back. In the middle, okay, they can be stretched back, but in the lower part, they have the highest compliance. They have the most power to stretch. So if I take a deep breath, the lowest holes will be able to take the most of the air. So this is an important concept that I wanted to explain in the beginning. Now let's look about the lung. I just want to have a bigger picture of the lung. Here we have the lung, the right lung and the left lung, the pleura and the ribs, the thoracic wall. There's 3 types of pressure in the lung. In the beginning, inside the alveolar will be the intra-alveolar pressure. In the pleura will be intrapleural pressure. And the outside is the atmospheric pressure. So 3 types: intra-alveolar pressure, intrapleural pressure, and atmospheric pressure. Now, if you look on the lung, imagine this is the sternum. This is the sternum, and my fingers are the ribs. How does the ribs look like? They are not the same direction. The sternum is not parallel. The ribs are coming from up. So they are going from superior to inferior. They are like this. So what happens? Imagine the ribs are like this. What happens when you take a breath? The ribs become like that. They go the lateral aspect of the ribs goes up. So the diameter increases. So what happens? The pressure inside become low. It become negative, so you can breathe. So what happens? They call it the bucket handle movement. So here's the sternum, here's the ribs. They move like this. And the sternum also moves anteriorly. So it's like the water pump. You remember, I don't think many people see it, but the water pump is like something like that, and it has a handle. The handle moves up and down. So also the sternum moves anteriorly and posteriorly. So you are now increasing the anterior posterior diameter, and now you're increasing this diameter, the lateral diameter. So, and all of that happens when? During inspiration or expiration. So the major muscle for respiration is what? As we know it, is the diaphragm. During quiet breathing, we only use the diaphragm and the external intercostals. Forced breathing, we use another muscle, sternocleidomastoid, and other muscles. In expiration, it's passive, but in forced expiration, we use extra muscle, the internal intercostals, and the abdominal muscles. But let's now go back to the pressure. There's a very important concept that I want to say is the transmural pressure. What does transmural pressure means? Is the pressure which is exerted across a wall. So there is a wall, there's a pressure gradient here, and the pressure gradient here. The pressure difference between them is the transmural pressure. So if you want to calculate the pressure between 1 and 2, the alveolar and the pleural pressure, the intra-alveolar pressure and the intrapleural pressure, this is called transpulmonary pressure, the pressure between the alveoli minus the pressure between the pleural. This is what Dr. Salah talked about, is the transpulmonary pressure. The second pressure, there is also atmospheric pressure. So there is also can be a pressure gradient between 2 and 3, the intrapleural pressure and the atmospheric pressure. This is called transthoracic pressure. Also we have another one, is the pressure between the alveoli and the atmospheric pressure. This is called transrespiratory pressure. A very important point here is that the atmospheric pressure, we calculate it as 0. We will have it as 0. It's actually not 0, it's 1 or something, but we calculate it as 0. So the transthoracic pressure, it's pleural minus atmospheric, which is 0. So it will be also only pleural pressure. Respiratory pressure, alveolar minus the atmospheric. It will be also 0. So here I have a bigger picture. As you can see, here's the alveoli, here's the pleural cavity, and here is the thoracic wall. So the pressure between the alveoli and the pleural is called transpulmonary pressure. The pressure between the pleural and the atmospheric is called transthoracic pressure, and the pressure between the alveoli and the atmospheric is called respiratory pressure. Another point that I want to talk about is the compliance versus elasticity. This is a very, very important concept to understand in the lung. Usually, we have the lung, if you take the lung outside the body, what will happen? The lung has the ability to stretch back. What's elasticity? Is the resistance to deformation. Resistance to deformation. So the lung, if you fill it with air, it will recoil back. So what can fill the lung with air? Usually, what is the inspiration? Inspiration happens when because of the intrapleural pressure, the negativity of the intrapleural pressure, because we have the lung is recoiling back and the chest by itself wants to go out. So there's two of them going different directions, so the pleural pressure becomes negative, and that's the driving force for the respiration in the lung. So the elasticity, if you take the lung outside, the lung wants to recoil back, and the thoracic, if you take it only without the lung, it wants to go out. So if you put the lung inside the thoracic, that means both of them will counter each other, and the end it will not go below the residual volume that we know. So the compliance versus elasticity, this is an important point that I want to talk about. Here, imagine that we have two pieces of elastic fibers. This one's very, very thick, and this one's very, very thin. Okay? The thick one has more elastic tissue than the thin one. That's very easy. The thick one is very, very hard to stretch. When you stretch it, it will want as much as possible to go back. So that means what? It cannot be stretched. It's very hard to stretch. The compliance definition, we said already the elasticity is the resistance to deformation. The compliance definition is the stretchability of the tissue. The more it's stretched, the more it's compliant. So this piece of elastic fiber will not be able to stretch as much as we want. So it will recoil back very hard. That means this more elastic, less compliant. Actually, both of them are not equal each other. Both of them are opposite to each other. Let's go to the second piece of elastic fibers. The second piece of elastic fibers has less elastic tissue inside, so it will be able very easily to stretch. So that means the compliance here is more than this one. And the stretchability, it will recoil back, but not as strong as this one. And today, Dr. Salah, I believe, he spoke about the obstructive versus restrictive, and etc. So the compliance will equal the pressure, the volume over the pressure. Imagine the pressure is 2, and the volume, if you can put 10 very large volume inside the same pressure, that means more compliant. Less volume, it means it's less compliant. So if you go also to the elasticity formula, we said it's opposite to each other, so the elasticity will equal the pressure over the volume. This was overview about the things pulmonary ventilation, and now I will continue the second part. Now I'm going to talk about the compliance, the lung compliance, the compliance of the chest wall, and the capacities and volumes in the lung. I'm going to start with the capacities and volume in the lung. Here, as you can see, here we have the residual volume. What do we mean by residual volume? It's the volume that's always inside the lung. Whatever you do, you cannot expire it. So this residual volume is inside the lung, you cannot expire because the chest wall will not enable you to expire this volume, because the ribs supports the chest wall, cannot recoil back. So the residual volume, we said it will be always inside the lung. Another volume, we have the expiratory residual volume. This volume will be inside the lung, it will not go out during quiet breathing. What do I mean by that? During quiet breathing now, this quiet breathing, I am not expiring the expiratory residual volume, I am playing at the tidal volume. So if I expire in quiet breathing, I expire the tidal volume. If I inspire the tidal volume. During active breathing, when there is a dog behind you, running behind you, and you are running so fast, what happens? You have active expiration. So what happens? You are expiring all the expiratory residual volume until you reach the residual volume. And after that, after the tidal volume that we are playing at the tidal volume in quiet breathing, the active inspiration. So after the tidal volume, you are filling your lung. I can fill it more. I can fill it more with air. This is what we call is the inspiratory residual volume. The residual volume plus the expiratory residual volume is the functional residual capacity. So this capacity is always inside the lung during quiet breathing, but not active breathing. The total lung capacity is all of them together. Now, I'm going to go to the compliance. We finished the capacities and volumes. We are going now to compliance. Here you can see we have the lung alone, the chest wall, and the chest wall plus the lung. As you know, that the lung itself has its own compliance, because I talked before that we have 3 transmural pressure, intra-alveolar pressure, intra-pleural pressure, and the atmospheric pressure. The lung itself, it has its own compliance. What do I mean by that? You remember exactly the compliance of the lung, we said compliance equal volume over pressure. So it will be volume, but what pressure we are meaning here? What pressure we mean here is the transpulmonary pressure, is the pressure between the alveoli and the pleural pressure, the TPP. So the pressure will be here, TPP. The compliance of the chest wall will be between the chest wall and the atmospheric pressure. Remember what we call that? Transthoracic pressure. So it will be here, volume over transthoracic pressure. Now we go for the compliance of the whole respiratory system. We have a compliance here between those two, and the compliance here between those two. If you add them together, you get the compliance of the whole respiratory system. So it will be the compliance of the lung plus the compliance of the chest wall. Now, as you can see, we have 3 graphs here. What do I mean by those 3 graphs? Each graph with this picture, this one with this picture, and this one with this picture, and the rest. So, what can you see here? Here we can see the residual volume, functional residual capacity, and the total lung capacity. Here we can see volumes, and here we can see pressure. At pressure 0, if I am now stopped respiration, if I open my mouth, the pressure inside my lung is the same as outside the lung. So we are playing now at pressure 0. If you take the lung out, what did we say? The lung has more elastic tissue. So the lung will love to recoil back. So what will happen at pressure zero? What will happen at pressure zero? The lung will be less than the residual volume. You remember before that I said no matter what you do, you cannot take out the residual volume, but when the lung is outside, you can do that. The lung will shrink more, so it will be almost here. So it will, if you do an inspiration, it will go up until it reaches the total lung capacity. If you do expiration, it will go down, but it will not, of course, reach zero because you can never take everything out of the lung. Now this is the graph for the lung. We'll go for the graph of the chest wall. The chest wall, what did we say before? It always loves to stretch. It loves to goes out. So at pressure zero, how much the pressure will be inside the lung? It's almost 6% of the total lung capacity, so it will be here. If you do inspiration, it will go until it reaches the total lung capacity. And if you do expiration, it will go down until it reaches the residual volume. It cannot go below that because we said that you have the ribs that support the chest wall, so it will not be able to recoil much further than that. But what will happen if you add both? See, now let's draw them. So the blue will be for the lung graph, so it will be like this. If you do expiration, if you do expiration, it will reach until it reaches the total lung capacity. The green will be for the chest wall alone. As we said, it will be, if you do inspiration, it will go as long as the total lung capacity, and do expiration, it will go just till the residual volume. Now in red, this adding both of them, it will be around the middle. So if you do inspiration, it will go to reach the total lung capacity. Expiration, it will go just to the residual volume. Now I have talked about the pulmonary ventilation, the amount of air that's going inside the lung for the purpose of the gas exchange. I talked about the lung mechanics, the mechanism of the air of inspiration and expiration. We said that we have the diaphragm, it's a major muscle, so we have muscles that aids in the mechanisms, is one of the mechanisms. We have the resistance, we have the compliance, and we have the elasticity. And with this, I conclude my presentation. Thank you.